Hello, everybody. Give everybody a chance to get on. Kim, did you see your grandson today? I didn't get you.
Yeah, I had to unmute. Not yet. They're not here yet. They're not up in this area yet.
Oh,
He runs tomorrow. I'll see him tomorrow.
I had my baby today for 3 hours and it was awesome.
Yeah.
I have help because Alexa's here and she loves Alexa, but it's just so nice to have them here. I don't know, it's something different than having them with their parents because mom and dad are one thing, but if it's just me, we sort of do our own thing and
Right.
love it. Just enjoy it so much. Mhm.
I'm glad she let you take care of her.
Yeah. Well, today was a very special doctor's appointment.
Ah.
She announced on Facebook today that they're expecting baby 2.
Aha.
So a lot of fun that we got to watch her and just happy all around.
Yep.
Hello, Katie Bankhead. Did you see what Katie put? I did tell that she knew. She was being so polite, wasn't saying anything. Katie, we're talking about
Hi.
Courtney's doctor visit today.
Yeah.
And her little announcement on Facebook. So
I did not see it on Facebook.
yeah.
I haven't been on Facebook all day, so I didn't know it either. Congratulations to all of you.
Yep.
Awesome.
We're super excited. I think they're going to wait to figure out what it is. But what they did find out was it was like a little Mexican jumping bean. It was, he was, whoever, I say he, I don't know, but the baby was standing straight up in her uterus. So he or she or whatever is going to be Bonnie's very active now, but she was very calm. And this baby's going to start out.
Love it. No two are alike, for sure.
That's right. And even yours, Tori, all so close in age. I mean, mine were close, but yours are closer than mine, aren't they? Do you have girls that are within a year of each other?
My first two are 14 and a half months apart, and my second and third are 19 months apart.
Oh, okay. So Alexa and Jana are closer than yours. They're actually 12 months and 2 days. So.
Oh, wow.
But they were like night and day. So funny how that works.
Yes, indeed. You think you got something figured out with one, and then it doesn't work with the next one.
Yeah. That's exactly right. We could probably get started. Everybody's a little slow tonight just because it's that time of year, I guess. I mean, I think we could say that every time of the year. A few of my younger girls who had contacted me and who this really was designed for are gonna have to listen to it recorded, which by the way, it's being recorded. It's not going anywhere like YouTube or anything like that, but I can email it to you, I think. So it's just going straight to my computer because they don't want to miss.
Nice.
So we can go ahead and get started if people join, and if you see that they're joining. I think maybe I can only see if they're joining, but let me see if I can. Let me see if I can figure out a way to just let them all in. Nope, doesn't look like it, but that's all right. I'll just keep an eye on that. And there is a noise that should happen too. So it's awesome that everybody's here. It's so funny. You're all from different places except for Tori and Kim, who are mother and daughter. The rest of you are practically from different states. um, but we've had, I think this is lesson 3. Is this lesson 3? Not,
think
yeah.
so.
So, no, I had a preview lesson before this where we had vocab and everything. But, you know, we're just right now going through Genesis. And I know I've explained this to some of you already, but this is an aerial view, and it is for the purpose of having a working knowledge. You know, it's awesome when somebody gets up front and they use Old Testament references at church, but I've noticed that a lot of our younger people at church don't always get it. They don't really know the timelines of the Old Testament. It might be because, like for me, I learned it when I was teaching Bible classes for children. That definitely educated me. But also, I, at one point, taught an Old Testament survey class for the women at Louisville Church of Christ. We had a really, really big ladies class there. And that was so educational and eye-opening for me, just because it's timeline, you know? What happened in what order and who lived when, and, you know, who were they connected to, kind of thing. So in the beginning of Genesis, life is really, really simple, right? Because you start out with creation, which we already have looked at. It's specifically chapter 2, the creation of man and woman. There are lots and lots of lessons you could probably learn from Genesis chapter 1. But remember, we're mostly dealing with the people because we're going to be going through the timeline and talking about the people of God. So lots of lessons to be learned from creation. But that's not really what we're here for on this particular set of lessons. But chapter 2, you begin with the creation of man and woman. And that's significant because Adam's the first man, Eve is the first woman. Adam was not, it wasn't good for him to be alone. Everything else was good. God saw that it was good. God saw that it was good. You'll see that repeated again and again. And then you'll see that he decided it was not good that man was alone. So he made what is, it depends on what translation you have, but he made a helper suitable for the man. So they were partners. And they were not really complete without each other. That doesn't necessarily mean couples are not complete without the other couple, part of the couple, but what it does mean is that man alone on earth was not enough. Okay, so, and in particular, this man had a woman custom made for him. So that's chapter 2. And then into chapter 3, what's significant about chapter 3 is it's called the fall of man. That's the heading on my Bible. Yours might say something else. But the reason why that's important is because the fall of man and that first sin is referenced in the New Testament all the time. We looked at the scriptures that say through one man sin entered into the world, and then sin on all of us, because we all sin. And I don't have those notes right in front of me, but I can definitely get those to you. But that's a significant thing. If you don't know about Adam and Eve and the fall in the garden, you don't realize that sin entered the world through Adam and Eve. I heard that. Did you guys hear that? Yeah, okay. So if I miss it, you let me know. So that's chapter 3. And today we're going to really deal with chapter 4. Were there any kind of questions last week about chapter 3 and the fruit they were not supposed to eat? I did mention this, and I probably mentioned a million times because, like some of you know, I do a lot of repeating myself because I think there are themes in the Bible that are just so life-changing to us. One of them is that God is the best kind of parent. Do you see what he does? He gives the rules and the expectations, and then you know when you have transgressed or crossed the line or you're not obeying the rules. And we have the account that God did tell them about what they were not supposed to eat. But the serpent came in chapter 3, starting in verse 1 and kind of jumbles things up a bit. And, you're not allowed to eat from any tree in the garden. And Eve says, no, we're allowed to eat, but God has said, you shall not eat from the tree which is in the middle of the garden. So Eve quotes God and what he's asked of them, what he requires, which is interesting because we're never given that conversation. We're never told that God had a conversation with Eve as well as Adam. But clearly she's either learned it from Adam and Adam told her that God said this, or God told her too. I'm always of the mind that if it's significant and if we need to know it, we would know that. But regardless, she tastes the fruit. She gives it to Adam. They hide from God because they did get the tree. They did get the knowledge of good and evil. They did. And suddenly they realized how naked they were, and they were ashamed, and they hid from God. And they have an encounter with God, and God distributes a punishment to them. And the reason I'm kind of recapping this is because this actually comes back on us in chapter 4. But if you look at chapter 3, verse 14, the Lord God tells the serpent he's in trouble and gives him his punishment. In verse 16, he says to the woman, this is your punishment. And then he turns to Adam in verse 17, and he tells him what his punishment will be. And it was because they knew what the expectation was. And the reason why I'm painting this picture is because there are people who believe that God is angry and vindictive and hateful, and he is very, very interested in catching you in every little thing that you're doing and cutting your legs out from under you and punishing you. And you don't see that in this scenario. You see the rules were set down. God gave them everything else they wanted, and they defied him and broke the rules, and they were punished. So moving on to chapter 4, and that's where we're going to spend our time. I really thought we'd get to Noah way before this, but we're not. I do plan to do that next week. But Cain and Abel. So I'm going to read, actually, Kim Drawpaw's on, and she's usually my best reader. Kim, you want to read for us? Oh, she's busy.
I muted it. Okay, sure.
Okay, so could you read Genesis 4, verses 1 through 8?
Okay. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man from the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was the keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offerings, but for Cain and his offerings he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him.
Thank you. So there's a lot in those first 8 verses, but I want to start with verse 1. We have Eve and Adam. They conceive a baby. What's very interesting about this is sex is referred to here as he knew his wife. It's just a way to say it. And it does not mention this was the only time this happened. It never happened before. It was for the purpose of procreation. We're not told that. Also, we're not told that it's an evil thing or a good thing. Either one, it's just a thing. It's just mentioned. So that's pretty significant, because from this point on, people try to turn it into something evil and horrific and We studied this Tuesday morning, a few Tuesdays back, because we're in First Thessalonians, and Paul is reminding them to stay sexually pure, with their own bodies or with their own wife, or the word is vessel, and we kind of went over that a little, but that doesn't mean all of it is bad. And there are religions out there, many religions out there, who will regulate when and where and with whom that you can have sex. And the Bible's clear that it's a man and a woman who are married. So that's a lot to say about that. But she conceives, she gives birth to Cain. And this is interesting because Cain we're told what his name means. If you notice, if you look down in verse 2, we're not told what the name Abel means. The reason this is probably significant, and I'm supposing a little bit here, so, if I get into the weeds, I'm sorry, and I won't do it again, but some people say it's because she was told that she was there when God was telling the serpent about the problems between her seed and the serpent's seed, and that this was the seed that she was promised. So she says, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. And I do think it's interesting, this is the first child that was ever born. So how much they knew about this, we don't know. We don't know if they had a mini educational course on this from God or what they were expecting. But what she does say is it was from God, which is amazing because throughout the Bible, it's just significant that you will hear, God opened her womb and she conceived. These children are from God. A lot of times in our culture, because, they're born outside of the bounds of marriage, which is not ideal, of course, that child is still a child from God and should be treated such. Every baby's a blessing. So she says in verse 1, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. Some versions say that the name Cain means gotten one, which is interesting. I looked up the name Abel, and I don't know if this meaning came later or what, but the name Abel actually means breath. So it's not mentioned in verse 2. But then in verse 2, it does tell us, and this is significant, verse 2 tells us that Abel was a keeper of flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. It does not show that either one of those is better or worse at this point. But I do think it's really interesting because who do people say the first men on earth were? They were cavemen, right? They were cave dwellers. They were hunter-gatherers. They didn't communicate with each other at all. And that, in some people's point of view, went on for tens of thousands of years that people were just cavemen. But you don't get that. In the very next generation of people, you have a tiller of the ground and a keeper of flocks. What I do think is interesting is Cain has to till the ground and work the ground. Why? Because Adam ate the fruit and he was punished. If you look, it's just across my page a little, but in chapter 3 and verse 17, the second half of 17, it says, cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you will eat bread, till you return to the ground, because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So Cain has the job of working that ground and tilling the ground, and I do not possess the skill in any way. But some people really do, and they really have to work hard at it, and can get the ground to kind of behave. I don't know, Cindy, you spent a lot of years in Texas. I can't get Texas to give me anything, but
I do not have a green thumb whatsoever. Everything I plant dies.
now Pennsylvania, I had some success in Pennsylvania, but not here in Texas for sure. So significant that we have a keeper of flocks and a tiller of the ground. Also significant that it technically started with Adam. Now we're not told Adam tilled the ground, but we are told that God said, you will have to till the ground. So, no cavemen there at all, which I really think is significant. None at all. So moving on. Let's see, in verse 3, so it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Now, you're all pretty good Bible students, so I'm sure the offering to the Lord doesn't sound weird to you at all. But to a person who's never heard of this, an offering to the Lord sounds interesting. What exactly is that? We know, well, we don't know up to this point in Genesis, but we know from reading other parts of the Bible that God had a system of offerings, that animals were sacrificed, that there was so much blood that was slathered and slung and dripped and drained. I mean, there was blood everywhere in those animal sacrifices. But up to this point, we've not been told anything about sacrifices, right? I mean, we read it all up to this point. But an offering is a very, very continuous theme throughout the Bible. And of course, ultimately, that leads to Jesus's death on the cross as being sacrificed as the purest lamb. But can you see, you have to begin in the Old Testament to at least get some kind of understanding of that. The sacrificial lamb. Also notice that we did not hear of Adam making any sacrifices or offerings. Again, we're not privy to that conversation where God told this person or that person and what he told them. In your Bibles, and it happens after the Pentateuch. Remember, the Pentateuch is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the first 5 books. But the book of Job is considered a very, very, very early book. And in the beginning of Job, he is sacrificing for the sins of his children. That he is saying, if they've done anything wrong, I just want to cover all the bases pretty much. And so Job obviously knew about a sacrificial system. Now, he tends to be a part of the patriarchal system, which are the fathers. Job was the father of all of his people, and they lived in those clusters. And again, that's a little later down, but it's the same idea. It's the same sacrificial system. And then, but actually before Job, well, honestly, I'm not sure. I just know that Job is early on. But let's also talk about Abraham. Abraham made sacrifices to a priest called Melchizedek. He brought a tithe to him and brought an offering to him. So, and of course, many of you know, we haven't gotten to it yet in Genesis, but Abraham was told to take his son Isaac up on Mount Moriah and sacrifice him. So Isaac obviously knew about the sacrificial system because he's going up the mountain with his father, and he says, well, I see the kindling, I see the things we need for the sacrifice, but I don't see the sacrifice. So, clearly they both understood something about the sacrificial system. I know I'm bringing up a lot of instances and saying we don't really know, but this is, called an inference. When you get from the Old Testament here, we've got Cain and we got Abel giving an offering to the Lord. It can be understood that they knew that God wanted an offering from them, which can be understood that God talked to them about that. Okay, it's one of the tools of understanding how to read the Bible. So now we can talk about what their offerings were. Verse 3, Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Now, I can jump ahead a little bit and tell you there's absolutely nothing with a fruit of the ground offering, as far as we know, because in Exodus and Leviticus, they're actually told to bring part of the grain, part of their growth, part of their crops. In the New Testament, Jesus, like in Matthew 23, talks to the Pharisees and says, you guys are crazy. You are so concerned about the tiniest things. And he mentions you tithe, which is 1/10 of mint and cumin and dill. You tithe 1/10 of those, and then you neglect some of the weightier matters of the law. I think it's the same area where he says you swallow a gnat. No, you strain a gnat and you swallow a camel, right? So Jesus was making a point, but he also is noting that of their crops, the mint and cumin and dill, they would count all the little leaves and give 1/10 of it. So we know that there was some of the giving of the ground. So that's not a problem as far as we can tell for Cain. But in verse 4, Abel on his part also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. Now we're not told that Cain brought the first fruits of his crop. We're not told that he gave the best of his crops. That could be part of the problem here. But here's the problem in verse 4, and the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering. But for Cain and for his offering, he had no regard. So here we have God's response to their offering, which is interesting, kind of a side note. And that would be, some people think that any kind of offering, because it's my offering, that God will accept it because it comes from my heart. This is really meaningful for me, and so that's what I'm giving to God. But all through the Bible, God's been very specific about what he wants. This is one of those areas where people could say, God just chose a favorite. He chose a favorite one over the other. But you're just never going to get that characteristic from God. So I don't think this is the right place to assign that to him. So at the end of verse 5, so Cain became very angry and his countenance fell. Before we move on from the offerings, I'd kind of like to look at Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 13, just because a lot through the book of Hebrews, we talk about the Old Testament sacrificial system, because obviously the book of Hebrews was written to Hebrew people who are now Christians. So Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 13. I might start a little bit before that. Let's see. I'm going to read 11 through 14. Hold on a minute. Okay, so I'm in Hebrews 9, 11 through 14. Let me say that one more time. Hello, Miss Betty Buckite. Happy to have you. Before I read this, I wanted to tell you we're in Hebrews chapter 9, 11 through 14. But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things to come, he entered through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this creation, and not through the blood of goats and calves, but through his own blood. He entered the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling those who have been defiled sanctify for the cleansing of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? So I bring this up because we're actually in Genesis chapter 4, but I bring this up because you see he's referencing this sacrificial system where they bring offerings to God. And he says specifically that the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer are not the things that are going to save you. There's a more perfect sacrifice that Jesus sacrificed himself. Also in Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 4, I want to read 1 through 4. Hebrews 10, 1 through 4. Remember, whoever wrote Hebrews was writing to people who fully understood this Old Testament sacrificial system. For the law, since it has only a shadow of the things to come and not the very form of things, can never, by the same sacrifices which they offer continually year by year, hang on, sorry, let me give my phone to Alexa, which they offer continually year by year, make perfect those who draw near. Otherwise, would they not have ceased to be offered, because the worshipers, having once been cleansed, would no longer have had consciousness of sins. It's actually saying that sacrifice needed to be given every year, year after year. Verse 3, but in those sacrifices, there is a reminder of sins year by year, for it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. And we're not reading through Hebrews, but just, spoiler alert, Hebrews is all about how much greater Christ is than the old system. And it's proving how much greater he is. But I want to read some of those New Testament references, because remember, this is an overview that just gives you kind of a working knowledge of the Old Testament. And it's significant, this sacrificial system, very significant. So we were in, at the end of verse 5 of Genesis chapter 4. But before you turn away from Hebrews, I'd like you to look at chapter 11, Hebrews 11 and verse 4, because Cain and Abel are mentioned here in Hebrews 11, verse 4. I feel like I wrote the wrong thing down. No, it's actually Abel, because this is, sometimes people call it the Hall of Faith, the list of all these great people of faith through the years. And remember, Hebrews was written to people who knew their Old Testament and they knew the Jewish history, and so all these people would have meant a lot to the people in the book of Hebrews. Verse 4, by faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained the testimony that he was righteous, God testifying about his gifts, and through faith, though he is dead, he still speaks. So that's a little hint into the difference between Cain and Abel's sacrifices. Again, I don't think that we can say one was grain and one was animal, because grain sacrifices were important to God. But because we don't have the directive from God explaining what sacrifices were going to be acceptable, we can't really measure. But what we know clearly, and that is he had no regard for Cain's sacrifice, and he did have regard for Abel's. And Cain gets super mad about this, and his countenance has fallen, he drops his head, and he is upset. He's angry, we see in verse 6. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? He continues in verse 7, if you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. Again, we're not going too far off of our path here in Genesis, but that's pretty significant. I mean, those are the words of God saying, you're basically not sober-minded, you're discouraged, you're downhearted, and you know what? That's an opportunity for sin to get a hold of you. He says that in verse 7. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. But your head is down and your countenance has fallen. So, that's a little extra in this lesson. And again, remember, there's so much in Genesis. I think you could go verse by verse, but we're just doing a bit of an overview. Then Cain talks to his brother, and he actually, as you know, because we read verse 8, he kills his brother in verse 8, but he has his opportunity to talk with God about it. He has an opportunity to sober up about the whole experience, but he doesn't take that opportunity. And so verse 8, Cain told Abel his brother. So he actually goes and talks about this encounter that he had with God. And it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and killed him. That is just not a lot of words to describe what happened there. I mean, there's a lot left to your imagination. We don't know the timeline or how long that took, but Cain obviously did not lift up his countenance or look for the next opportunity to offer an offering or get some time in between his anger and his frustration and his dealing with his brother. Just so many things that he could have done. So he rises up against his brother. I mean, as at this point, these are the only two other than Adam and Eve on the entire earth. And he kills his partner, basically, his brother, the boy who was born right after him. I mean, that's devastating. So he rises up and he kills his brother out of anger. Anybody have anything to add in verses 1-8 before we move on?
I do, Jen.
Go ahead.
I really have always been intrigued by verse 7 and just all that God said to him. But I think what just kind of hit me, and partly because I've been reading the Doris Black book again lately, But How Can I, about resentment and bitterness. And that just really struck me because it seems to me that it's a possibility, and we don't know, that he was jealous of his brother getting God's approval and that he didn't have it. And God is telling him, you need to master it, which makes me think, well, it's possible to master it. God wouldn't tell him to do it if it wasn't possible. So even though we don't really know what happened there, I've always kind of felt like there was some kind of a jealousy comparison going on there between siblings, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, something that would lead him to, because his problem wasn't with Abel, his problem was with God.
Right.
But his response was that he murders Abel. It made me kind of think of Judas Iscariot. You know, after he had a problem with God, he murders himself. You know, he is devastated and takes his own life. So, you know, I think it's not too far away to suppose that it was a jealous rage. Yeah. But again,
But it does give hope to know that God tells him, you must master it, that it's possible if we really work on, you know, if we have a problem like that, and that we can master it. That's all.
And for me, through this, I hear lessons of sobriety. I mean, I'm always beating that horse, but just the lesson of, here are the facts, and God is very matter of fact here. You are angry, and if you don't get a hold of this, then you're really in danger.
Yep.
Just the facts. Okay. Kim Draba, are you ready to read for me again?
Yes.
Okay, can you read verses 9-15?
Then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him.
Thank you. So this is actually only as far as we're going to go today, but there's so much in these last verses 9-16 or 15. God again talks to Cain, and he asks him, you know, where is Abel? And Cain's like, I don't know, you know, it's not my day to look after him. You know, we get that phrase, my brother's keeper, which is really, really a a common phrase in our culture. People use it in all different ways. But it comes from this: am I my brother's keeper? Is this my day to watch him? And God knows what's happened with Abel, of course. And he says, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. So interesting, because he personifies blood here. Blood is not alive, especially the blood of a dead person is not alive, but he says it's crying to me from the ground. You've spilled this blood of your brother. And he takes away from him the one thing that he does, because Cain in verse 2 was a tiller of the ground, right? But here he is in verse 11, he says, now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. Made me think of the circle of life, the circle of life where you've got the ground, and the ground grows flowers, and the animals eat the flowers, and eventually they die and their body decomposes into the ground, making the soil rich. It's that circle. But here we have the blood of Abel on the ground, and so God takes away Cain's ability to grow anything. he makes him unable to do what he used to do, which is also interesting, because it's something like when my children were younger and I was trying to teach them how to cook. You teach them how to cook so that they don't have to forever in their life be dependent on somebody else to do it, right? This man had a skill. He was a tiller of the ground. He grew things, and now he is forever dependent upon somebody else to do that for him, because God took away this ability. So it was significant. And that's likely part of the reason why Cain is distressed and says, this is too much for me. So in verse 12, God says, when you cultivate the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. Cain's response, verse 13, my punishment is too great to bear. He said, you have driven me this day from the face of the ground, and from your face I will be hidden. And I will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me, because people will know about this. What people? We honestly don't know at this point what people he's referencing. That's always such a fun and tricky question when you ask, how did the earth get populated with only starting with 2 people? And I'm not here to really answer that for you. But, Cain is looking in the future, and he says, people are all going to want to kill me. Now, in verse 15, here's something significant here, because in our culture, we have something called the mark of Cain. And in years past, people actually thought that African American people bore the mark of Cain on them, and that it was a curse, and that they were to be cursed. But do you know what's significant about the mark of Cain? The mark of Cain actually protected him. It said in verse 15, so the Lord said to him, therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him 7-fold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain, so that no one finding him would slay him. But see, the thing is, by saying the mark of Cain, you're making it into something we don't even know, because what does it say here? He appointed a sign for Cain. So we don't even know what that means. But as so often happens, people like to politicize and make the Bible mean what they want it to mean and use it against other people, which is terrible. But that's just a very interesting outcome of just the first part of Genesis chapter 4, right? We've got the whole brother's keeper idea, and then we've got the mark of Cain idea that are significant, and they come out of the Bible. I think I'm losing everybody. So did you notice, or did you know that for people to really consider themselves educated people, even in our culture, that they will study the Bible? And it's for these specific things. It's for the things like, let's see, dust to dust, right? In chapter 3 and verse 19, for you are dust and to dust you shall return. Dust to dust, that's a biblical idea. Or like I said about brother's keeper in chapter 4 and verse 9. And also what we just read in chapter 4 and verse 15 about the mark of Cain or the sign of Cain. Those are biblically originated phrases and ideas that have found their way into our culture. So even like Ivy League schools, people will study the Bible. Now they don't study it like a miraculous writing like I do, but they study it like a work of literature so that people can understand what's in our culture. Let me see. Anybody have anything to add to that while I'm looking at my notes quickly? Everybody's frozen. Okay, so there was another significant thing I wanted to show you in this whole story, and that is chapter 4 and verse 4, where it talks about Abel and his offering. I sort of glossed over what he gave, but do you see in chapter 4, or verse 4, it says, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and their fat portions. It's not the same idea as, I'm going to wait and see what this year yields. And then once I know what it is, then I'm going to give a big portion to God, right? I will, but it's more than that. From the very beginning of the births of the flock, the firstlings, he's already giving back to God and sacrificing. And then the second phrase there is, and of their fat portions, which, I don't know, the 80s kind of ruined everybody's ideas of how good and bad fat portions were, right? I guess they're coming back with all this keto stuff. I actually saw, because I was looking through the sale flyers for my area, and they're now selling fat bombs for people who eat keto diets. So I don't know, sounds awful, but anyway, the fat portion was extremely valuable. It was very, very high in calories. It was high in protein. It was definitely used for more than just food. It was also used for things like soap and cleaning, anointing if they rendered it. And so the fat was extremely valuable. My son said, yeah, I was just watching that show Alone, where they dump you in the middle of a field, in the middle of the wilderness, and you've got to stay there longer than anybody. And he was learning about how this one guy survived because we cut all the fat off and throw it away. And he was like, this is really precious stuff. So that's an interesting mention there in verse 4. The firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. Also, I want to mention here again that not every command in the Bible is a command for you. And I kind of mentioned this before, and for those of you who are new this week, I wanted to mention that this whole study has sprung out of several people who are in their 20s who never learned this, became Christians, and are some of them are preachers' wives, and they're pretty new Christians, and some of them have just never learned any of this Old Testament stuff. You really learn it in your children's Bible classes. I mentioned Mike. Mike, became a Christian at maybe 15. And so he never was in any of the children's Bible classes. He had to learn this stuff later. But it's a very important phrase for me to tell you that not every command in the Bible is for you, which, maybe is very obvious to you, but it's an important tool for reading your Bible. Because when you talk about things like, in particular, something like instrumental music in worship to God, right? People will jump back and forth between Old and New Testament, and they'll use them interchangeably, and you just can't do that. For example, Noah was commanded to build an ark, and he did so, and there was a reason for that, and it's an awesome story that we're actually going to get to next week. But that is not the command for you. It is not commanded that you build an ark. Here we have the start of the offerings and the sacrifices to God, and this is not a command to you. We're New Testament Christians, and we're following we don't follow the old law because that was nailed to the cross. We're now under the law of liberty. But I'll probably say that phrase every week because that's seemingly simple and yet really important. Did anybody need any clarification on anything today? Okay, so next week, we're still not into the story of God choosing Abraham and Abraham's family. We get into that in Genesis chapter 12. We might actually get right up to the edge of that, but this is the time before that where there doesn't seem to be an official law. We're definitely not told about it anyway. And the reason why that's significant is because generally when we think about the Old Testament, we think about the Israelites, we think about the rules that they had, we think about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, being rescued from Egypt, the promised land, and we're going to get into all of that once we hit Genesis chapter 12.
Jennifer,
Go ahead.
I think someone else was trying to talk before me.
Fiona, did you have something?
Yes, did you tape last week? Because I was never able to get on. I had major computer errors.
Yeah, I recorded it. So if I can find it, which I think it's on my computer recorded. I know it recorded because it told me that it was. And so if I can find it, I'll see if I can email it to you.
Thank you.
No problem. Tori, did you have something?
Yeah, so in Leviticus 3:16, talking about the fat, it says the priest will burn these parts on the altar as food. It is an offering made by fire, and the smell of it is pleasing to the Lord. So I don't know what the fat, all the fat belongs to the Lord. I don't know how significant the fat was, but evidently it smelled good to the Lord.
Ugh, it smells terrible. So I actually had the reference in Leviticus 17 and verse 6, which is the same idea. It's called a sweet aroma. So, we always try to keep grease fires from happening, but apparently that was, the telltale sign that you were giving the very best and the most valuable.
Well, I mean, we have a barbecue restaurant close to by my house, and every time we drive by it, it's Heart 8 Barbecue, and every time we drive by, we roll down our windows because it smells so good. And I don't know if it's the fat burning or who knows, but I'm sure it's everything that they're doing to the wonderful meat. But I don't know. It's interesting that it smelled good to God. I don't know what significance that has, but I thought it was interesting.
Well, think how good bacon smells, and that's probably not the best meat we can eat today. But a lot of us that are older grew up on it because it was cheap then.
Yeah.
And we put it in our beans, we put it in, a lot of things that we cook because we cook from scratch, not from microwave. So we use salt pork, we use bacon, and that's all scrappy, fatty meat. But remember how bacon smells in the morning when it's frying. Even if you don't eat it, it's amazing how it smells.
Yes, but I do have to put this little caveat here that they definitely were not sacrificing bacon. We know that's true. However, I think it smelled like we once, when I was growing up, we were in Indiana, went to go see my father's family there. And man, there was this horrible, horrible smell. And it turns out that it was a pig farm. It just smelled really bad, and it's just the way it was. And the man who was with us, who was driving the car, rolled down the windows and he said, "Do you smell that?" And we were all like, "Yeah." Ugh. And he said, that's the smell of money, because it was this great big lucrative pig farm. And so, I mean, for God, that's the smell of obedience, and that you're giving your very best when you're smelling the grease fire, I guess. Okay, I don't mean to keep everybody very long. I really want to keep this just to an hour, but I'm really grateful that you guys are a part of this. Again, if I'm a little bit remedial, I'm sorry, but we're going to go a little forward and go a little back and kind of define things probably every week, because that's what, I mean, for me, that's how I learn. It's just repetition. When I was going through my different books and learning the Old Testament, I'd forget a definition and I go back and read it. That's just the way I think people learn the best. So we'll do a little cha-cha and go zigzag back and forth. All righty? It's awesome seeing everybody. Bye.